Sign the papers, Maya, or we'll make sure you lose everything. Councilman Richard Holt's threat still rang in her ears as 19-year-old Maya Chen clutched the inheritance document that had changed her life in one impossible afternoon. $2 million for a cemetery she'd never seen, from a great-uncle she'd never met. It should have been a dream come true, except the people offering the money were the same ones who'd kept her in foster care her entire life. If you're enjoying this story of Maya's incredible inheritance mystery, please take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments what you think she should do with the cemetery. Now, standing at the gates of Willowbrook Cemetery in the pouring rain, Maya had 30 minutes to decide. Take the money and disappear forever, or find out why powerful people were so desperate to steal land nobody had wanted for 15 years. Maya had lived in Millfield her entire 19 years, but she'd never set foot in Willowbrook Cemetery. Nobody had, not since old Ezra Blackwood died 15 years ago, taking with him whatever dark secrets the townspeople whispered about in hushed tones at the diner. "Maya, you don't have to do this alone." The voice belonged to Father Miguel Santos, the only adult in town who'd ever shown her genuine kindness. He emerged from behind a weathered mausoleum, his priest's collar slightly askew, his kind eyes creased with concern. "I know this must be overwhelming." Maya turned toward him, raindrops mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge. "They were laughing, Father Miguel, all of them, like I'm some kind of joke." Her voice cracked like the headstone nearest to her, split down the middle by time and weather. "Mrs. Henderson said I should just sign it over to the town and forget about it, said no good ever came from Blackwood land." Father Miguel approached carefully, as if she were a wounded animal that might bolt. "People fear what they don't understand, mija, but fear and truth are completely different things entirely." He gestured toward the sprawling cemetery, where headstones disappeared into the mist that seemed to perpetually shroud the back corners. "Your great-uncle Ezra, he wasn't the man people made him out to be in their stories." "You knew him?" Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. She'd grown up in foster homes after her parents died in a car crash when she was 7, bouncing between families who saw her either as a paycheck or a burden. The idea that she had family, real family, felt like trying to hold water in her hands. "I did." Father Miguel pulled out an old leather-bound photograph from his jacket. The image showed a tall, gaunt man with Maya's same dark eyes, standing beside a beautiful woman in a white dress. Behind them loomed the cemetery's wrought-iron entrance, but in the photograph it gleamed like new. "This is Ezra and Elena. They ran this cemetery with love, real love." Maya studied the photograph, noting how her great-uncle's face held none of the menace the townspeople attributed to him in their stories. Instead, she saw sadness, a deep weariness that she recognized from her own reflection. "What happened to them? Why do people talk about this place like it's cursed?" The priest's expression darkened. "Elena died young, tuberculosis. After that, Ezra became different, reclusive. People started making up stories to explain why he never left the cemetery, why he wouldn't sell when developers came knocking. By the time I arrived in Millfield 8 years ago, the stories had grown into legends. Thunder cracked again, closer this time, and Maya jumped. The legal document in her hand was growing soggy from the rain, the ink beginning to blur, but she could still make out the shocking truth printed there in official legal language. She now owned the 47-acre property. The lawyer, Mr. Cartwright, had seemed genuinely surprised when he'd read Ezra's will aloud, his eyebrows climbing toward his receding hairline with each bequest.
"There's more," Father Miguel said, glancing around nervously. "Ezra left you something else, something he made me promise to give you if you ever came here." He reached into his other pocket and withdrew an ornate brass key, its surface green with age, but still solid in its palm. He said this opens what matters most. Maya took the key, surprised by its weight. The metal was warm, despite the cold rain, and intricate symbols were carved along its length, symbols that seemed to shift and dance in her peripheral vision. Opens what? That's what you'll have to discover. Father Miguel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. But Maya, listen to me carefully. There are people in this town who've been waiting 15 years for Ezra to die, waiting for this land to become available. They won't be happy that it's gone to you instead of being auctioned off. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the rain. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the cemetery's entrance, their engines purring like satisfied cats. From the first vehicle emerged Councilman Richard Holt, his expensive suit somehow managing to repel the rain while everyone else got soaked. Behind him came Margaret Chen, no relation to Maya despite the shared surname, the town's leading real estate developer, her red lipstick a sharp slash against her pale face. "Well, well," Councilman Holt called out, his voice carrying easily across the cemetery. "Little Maya Chen, the cemetery queen. How fitting." His companions laughed on cue, and Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, despite the cold. Margaret Chen stepped forward, her heels sinking slightly into the soft girth. "Darling, you look positively drenched. Why don't we discuss this somewhere more civilized? I have an offer that could change your life." She gestured toward Maya's worn clothing with barely concealed disdain. "God knows you could use the money." Maya felt Father Miguel tense beside her, but she stepped forward on her own. She'd spent 12 years learning to navigate the cruelty of adults who saw her as disposable, and she wasn't about to back down now. "I just inherited this place an hour ago. What kind of offer could you possibly have?" "The kind that sets you up for life," Councilman Holt interjected, producing a folder from inside his jacket. "We're prepared to offer you $2 million for this land, cash, today. Think about it. You could go to college, see the world, never have to worry about money again." The number hit Maya like a physical blow. $2 million. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having, enough to escape Millfield and its whispered cruelties forever. But something in their eager expressions made her hesitate. "Why do you want this place so badly? Everyone says it's cursed." Margaret Chen's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, sweetheart, curses are just stories old people tell to scare children. This land is prime real estate, 47 acres in the heart of town. We could build luxury condominiums, a shopping center, maybe even a hotel. The economic impact would be tremendous." "Over the graves of the dead?" Father Miguel stepped forward, his voice carrying a dangerous edge Maya had never heard before. These people trusted this ground to be their eternal rest. "The dead don't vote," Councilman Holt said dismissively. "And frankly, Father, this doesn't a church. This is a business matter between adults." Maya looked down at the brass key in her palm, then up at the weathered headstones stretching into the mist. Something about this felt wrong. Not the cemetery itself, but the hungry way these adults were circling her, like vultures who'd spotted prey. "I need time to think about it."
"Time is a luxury you can't afford," Margaret Chen said, her friendly mask slipping. "Property values are rising, Maya. This offer won't be available forever. And frankly, what else are you going to do with this place? You're 19 years old, with no money, no family, no prospects. This cemetery will eat you alive." The words stung, because they held a grain of truth that Maya couldn't deny. She was alone in the world, had been so since she was 7 years old. But as she looked around at the forgotten graves, at the moss-covered headstones bearing names and dates that told stories of lives lived and lost, she felt something unexpected, a sense of belonging. These forgotten dead were outcasts too, abandoned by a town that preferred to pretend they didn't exist. "I said I need time to think," Maya repeated, her voice stronger this time. Councilman Holt's expression hardened. "You might want to think quickly. Old properties like this, especially ones that have been neglected for so long, they have a way of developing problems. Safety issues, code violations. It would be terrible if the city had to condemn the property for public safety reasons." The threat hung in the air, like the cemetery's perpetual mist, and Maya felt Father Miguel move protectively closer to her. She was about to respond when a new voice cut through the tension. "I believe the young lady said she needs time to think." The speaker was a woman in her 50s, emerging from the shadows between two large mausoleums. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair braided down her back and clothes that spoke of comfort rather than fashion. "Hello, Maya. I'm Dr. Sarah Whitmore. I was a friend of your great-uncle's." Councilman Holt's face flushed red. "Dr. Whitmore, this is a private conversation." "On public property, Mr. Holt. I'm the county historian, Mr. Holt. I make it my business to know when important historical sites are being threatened." She turned to Maya, her gray eyes kind but sharp. "Your great-uncle asked me to look after you should anything happen to him. I've been waiting 15 years to meet you." Maya felt the world tilt slightly. Another person who'd known Ezra. Another piece of the puzzle she didn't even know she was trying to solve. He knew about me? Oh, child, he knew everything about you. Every foster home, every school, every small triumph and heartbreak. He wanted so badly to contact you, but Dr. Whitmore glanced meaningfully at the group of officials. Certain people in this town made it clear that wouldn't be wise. The rain was falling harder now, and Maya found herself shivering despite the strange warmth still emanating from the brass key. The cemetery around them seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what choice she would make. Part of her wanted to take the money and run, to escape to somewhere nobody knew her story or saw her as the orphan girl who never quite fit anywhere. But another part of her, a part that was growing stronger with each passing moment, wanted to understand what her great-uncle had left her and why so many people seemed desperate to take it away. "I'm not signing anything today," Maya announced, surprised by the authority in her own voice. This is my property, and I'll decide what to do with it." Margaret Chen's composure cracked completely. "You foolish girl, you have no idea what you're walking into. This place has a history, a dark history. People have died here." "People die everywhere," Maya shot back. "That's why cemeteries exist. Not just natural deaths, strange deaths, unexplained accidents. Even Ezra himself died under mysterious circumstances. The coroner said it was a heart attack, but the man was as healthy as a horse."
Dr. Whitmore's expression grew dangerous. "Are you suggesting Ezra Blackwood was murdered, Mr. Holt? Because if you have evidence of that, I'm sure the police would be very interested to hear it." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain drumming against headstones and the distant cry of crows. Maya watched the exchange with growing unease, beginning to understand that whatever was happening here was much bigger than a simple real estate transaction. Finally, Councilman Holt gestured to his companions. "Come on, we've wasted enough time here." As they walked back toward their vehicles, he called over his shoulder, "3 days, Maya. Think carefully about what you really want out of life." As the black SUVs disappeared into the rain, Maya sank down onto a nearby headstone, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. The day had started with her working the breakfast shift at Murphy's Diner, scraping together tips to pay for her tiny studio apartment above the hardware store. Now she owned 47 acres of allegedly cursed land and had made enemies of some of the most powerful people in town. "I'm in over my head," she whispered. Dr. Whitmore sat down beside her on the wet grass, seemingly unbothered by the mud staining her clothes. "Child, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Ezra knew this day would come, and he prepared for it. But first, you need to understand what you've truly inherited." Father Miguel nodded gravely. "There are things about this cemetery, about your great-uncle, that the town has tried very hard to forget. But forgetting and erasing are different things entirely." Maya looked down at the brass key in her palm, noting how it seemed to pulse with warmth against her skin. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "That's for tomorrow," Dr. Whitmore said gently. "Tonight you need rest and time to process. But Maya," she turned to face her directly, "promise me you won't sign anything without talking to us first, and be careful who you trust. This town has been keeping secrets for a very long time." As if to emphasize her words, lightning flickered across the sky, briefly illuminating the cemetery in stark black and white. For just a moment, Maya could have sworn she saw figures moving among the headstones, not threatening, but watchful, protective even. She stood up slowly, the legal document still clutched in her other hand. "I'll be back tomorrow. I need to understand what my great-uncle wanted me to find." The brass key seemed to grow warmer at her words, and somewhere in the mist-shrouded depths of the cemetery, Maya could have sworn she heard the sound of a door creaking open. Maya's studio apartment felt even smaller when she returned that evening, soaked to the bone and overwhelmed by the day's revelations. The single room contained everything she owned: a narrow bed pushed against one wall, a card table that served as both desk and dining area, a hot plate balanced on top of a mini refrigerator, and 2 plastic bins that held her entire wardrobe. The bathroom was so small she had to step into the hallway to fully open the door. She peeled off her wet clothes and wrapped herself in the only towel she owned, a threadbare thing she'd taken from her last foster home.
The brass key sat on her card table, gleaming despite the apartment's harsh fluorescent lighting, and Maya found herself drawn to it repeatedly as she moved around the cramped space. Each time she looked at it, she felt a strange pulling sensation, as if the key were calling to something inside her chest. The legal document lay beside it, now dry but wrinkled from the rain. $2 million. The number felt surreal, like something from a dream or a movie about other people's lives. Maya had never had more than $300 to her name at any given time, and that was only because she worked double shifts at Murphy's Diner and lived on ramen noodles and whatever day-old pastries the restaurant threw away.
She pulled on her only pair of pajamas, faded pink flannel pants, and a t-shirt from a high school she'd attended for exactly 4 months before another foster placement fell through, and settled onto her bed with a notebook she'd stolen from the dollar store. Maya had always been a list maker, finding comfort in organizing her thoughts on paper when the world felt too chaotic to navigate. Things I know about today. 1. I inherited a cemetery from my great-uncle Ezra. 2. Important people want to buy it for way more than it should be worth. 3. Father Miguel and Dr. Whitmore knew Ezra and seemed to want to help me. 4. Everyone thinks the cemetery is cursed or dangerous. 5. I have a mysterious key that's supposed to open what matters most. The last item surprised her. Maya stared at it for a long moment, then crossed it out, then wrote it again. It was true, though she didn't understand why. Standing in that rain-soaked cemetery, surrounded by forgotten graves and feeling the weight of hostile stares from powerful adults, she'd experienced something she'd never felt in 19 years of life. The sense that she was exactly where she belonged. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor at Murphy's Diner. Heard about your inheritance. Don't think you can just skip shifts because you're rich now. Be here at 6 a.m. or find another job. She sighed and set the phone aside. Brenda Murphy had never missed a chance to remind Maya of her place in the world's pecking order. The diner job paid minimum wage plus tips, and the tips were terrible because Maya was too young, too quiet, and too obviously poor to charm the regular customers. But it was the only job she'd been able to find when she'd aged out of the foster system at 18, and it barely covered her rent and food. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Maya frowned. No one ever visited her, mainly because she didn't have any friends. She'd learned early that foster kids who got moved around a lot learned not to form attachments, and the habit had stuck even after she'd settled in Millfield. "Maya, it's Dr. Whitmore. I brought soup." Maya opened the door to find the county historian holding a thermos and a paper bag, her silver hair now loose around her shoulders. She'd changed into jeans and a wool sweater, looking more like someone's favorite aunt than a professional historian. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I thought you might be hungry, and I wanted to talk to you about your great-uncle without quite so many hostile ears around." Maya stepped aside to let her in, acutely aware of how shabby her apartment must look to someone who clearly has her life together. "I don't have much furniture." "Neither did I when I first moved to town. I spent my first 6 months sitting on boxes and eating off paper plates. There's no shame in starting over." She opened the thermos, and the scent of homemade chicken soup filled the tiny space. Maya's stomach growled audibly. She'd been too nervous to eat lunch, and breakfast had been a stale donut from the diner's reject pile. Brenda Murphy pretended not to notice as she poured soup into Maya's only bowl and unwrapped what turned out to be fresh bread still warm from the oven.
"Tell me about your great-uncle," she said, after she'd taken several grateful spoonfuls. The soup was perfect, rich and comforting in a way that made her chest ache for longing for something she'd never had. Dr. Whitmore settled back in the chair, studying Maya with those sharp gray eyes. Ezra Blackwood was one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Brilliant, kind, deeply principled. He had a degree in archaeology from Harvard and spoke 6 languages fluently. When he inherited the cemetery from his father, he could have sold it and lived anywhere in the world. Instead, he chose to honor the trust his family had maintained for over a century. What kind of trust? The Blackwood family weren't just cemetery caretakers, Maya. They were guardians. Willowbrook Cemetery is one of the oldest integrated burial grounds in the state. Black and white, rich and poor, all buried together when the rest of the South was still segregated. During the Underground Railroad, it served as a station. During the Civil Rights era, it was neutral ground where people could meet safely. Your family protected that history. Maya paused with her spoon halfway to her mouth. My family? Your great-grandmother was Ezra's sister. She left Millfield when she was young, but Ezra never forgot her. He followed your mother's life, and yours, from a distance. When your parents died, Dr. Whitmore's expression grew sad. He wanted to take you in, Maya. He tried to get custody. The soup suddenly tasted like nothing. Maya set down her spoon, her hand shaking slightly. What happened? The town council blocked it. They argued that a single elderly man living in a cemetery wasn't a suitable guardian for a child. They made it sound like they were protecting you, but Dr. Whitmore's voice hardened. They were protecting their own interests. Even then, 15 years ago, there were developers who wanted that land. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the rain. They kept me from my only family so they could steal my inheritance? I can't prove that was their motivation, but the timing was certainly convenient. Ezra was heartbroken. He set up a trust to make sure you were provided for in your foster homes, but even that was sabotaged. The money was tied up in legal red tape for years. There was supposed to be money? Maya's voice came out as a whisper. Dr. Whitmore nodded grimly. Enough to ensure you had everything you needed, good schools, college tuition, a real family if one could be found. Instead, you were shuttled between homes that saw you as either a paycheck or a burden. The walls of the tiny apartment seemed to be closing in. Maya stood up abruptly, pacing the few steps to the window that looked out over Main Street. Millfield looked peaceful in the evening light, all tree-lined streets and historic buildings that tourists loved to photograph. But now she saw it differently, as a place where powerful people manipulated systems to get what they wanted, even if it meant destroying a child's life in the process. Why are you telling me this? Maya asked without turning around. Because you need to understand what you're up against, and because Ezra made me promise to tell you the truth if this day ever came. Dr. Whitmore joined her at the window. He never stopped fighting for you, Maya. Every legal avenue, every appeal, every attempt to contact you directly, they blocked it all. By the time you turned 18 and were out of the system, he was already sick.
Sick? How? The councilman said he died of a heart attack, but implied it was suspicious. Dr. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. Ezra was being pressured to sell. Phone calls at all hours, legal challenges to his ownership, mysterious break-ins at the cemetery. The stress was enormous. His heart attack was real, but... She shrugged. Let's just say some people in this town have very convenient timing. Maya turned to face her, noting the careful way Dr. Whitmore was choosing her words. You think he was murdered? I think he was murdered by inches, death by 1,000 cuts. They made his life miserable until his body couldn't take it anymore. Dr. Whitmore's eyes were bright with unshed tears. But he was stubborn. He held on long enough to make sure his will was ironclad and his final gift to you was protected. The key. Among other things. Dr. Whitmore pulled a manila envelope from her purse. He wanted you to have these, too. Maya opened the envelope to find dozens of photographs spanning what looked like several decades. The earliest showed a much younger Ezra standing beside a beautiful woman with Maya's same dark eyes and stubborn chin. Later photos showed the cemetery in its prime, manicured lawns, polished headstones, families visiting graves with fresh flowers and obvious care. But it was the most recent photos that made Maya's breath catch. Hidden among images of the cemetery's decline were pictures of her, school photos, candid shots from a distance, newspaper clippings about honor roll achievements and academic awards she'd forgotten receiving. Ezra had been watching over her from afar, documenting a life he wasn't allowed to be a part of. He was so proud of you, Dr. Whitmore said softly. Every award, every achievement, despite the odds stacked against you. He used to say you had the Blackwood stubbornness, that you'd survive anything and come out stronger. Maya's vision blurred as she flipped through the photos. Here was proof that someone had cared about her, had been rooting for her success even when she felt completely alone in the world. The knowledge was devastating and healing at the same time. There's something else, Dr. Whitmore continued. Tomorrow, when you're ready, I'd like to show you what the key opens, but I want you to be prepared. What you'll find will change everything you think you know about yourself and this town. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to process the emotional whiplash of the day. This morning, she was a nobody, a foster kid scraping by on minimum wage and food stamps. Now she was an heiress with enemies, a legacy she didn't understand, and evidence that she'd been loved by someone she'd never had the chance to meet. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why do you care? I mean, I'm grateful, but you don't owe me anything. You could have just stayed out of it. Dr. Whitmore smiled, the expression transforming her face from stern to warm. Because 15 years ago, a heartbroken old man asked me to promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure his great-niece knew the truth. And because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. I was a foster kid too, Maya. Different circumstances, different era, but I know what it feels like to be alone in the world. No child should go through what you've endured.
They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Maya finishing her soup while Dr. Whitmore examined the sparse contents of the apartment with the eye of someone who understood the difference between chosen minimalism and forced poverty. I should probably ask, Maya said eventually. What exactly am I walking into tomorrow? What's this key going to show me? The truth about why this cemetery is really valuable, Dr. Whitmore replied, and the truth about why your family was chosen to guard it. Maya fingered the brass key, feeling its impossible warmth against her skin. Outside her window, Millfield was settling into evening routines, families gathering for dinner, children being called in from play, the normal rhythms of a small town that looked peaceful on the surface. But she was beginning to understand that surface appearances in Millfield were deeply deceptive. Dr. Whitmore, what if I'm not strong enough for this? What if I take their money and run? The older woman studied her for a long moment, then reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. Child, you survived 19 years in a system designed to break you.
And you came out with your kindness intact. You're stronger than you know." After Dr. Whitmore left, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the building settle around her. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight brought questions that twisted in her stomach like hunger pains. What if the truth was something terrible? What if her great-uncle had been involved in something illegal or dangerous? What if the townspeople were right to fear the cemetery? But underneath those fears ran a stronger current. Curiosity mixed with something that felt like hope. For the first time in her life, Maya had a real connection to family, to history, to something bigger than just surviving day to day. Whatever tomorrow brought, it had to be better than spending the rest of her life serving coffee to people who looked through her like she was invisible. Maya fell asleep clutching the brass key, and her dreams were filled with mist-covered graves and the sound of doors creaking open to reveal rooms full of golden light. Maya's alarm clock hadn't even sounded when harsh pounding on her door jolted her awake at 5:30 a.m. She stumbled out of bed, still groggy, and opened the door to find Brenda Murphy standing in the hallway with her arms crossed and her usual scowl firmly in place. "Well, well," Brenda said, pushing past Maya into the tiny apartment. "Little Miss Inheritance thinks she can just skip work without calling in." She was a woman in her 50s who wore her bitterness like armor. Her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into a permanent expression of displeasure. "I'm not skipping work," Maya said, trying to shake off the lingering effects of her dreams. "My shift doesn't start until 6. "Your shift started at 5 today. Did you even check your phone?" Brenda held up her own device. "I sent you 3 texts last night changing your schedule. The Rotary Club is having their breakfast meeting, and I need all hands on deck." Maya grabbed her phone from the nightstand, noting that the battery had died sometime during the night. When she plugged it in, sure enough, there were 3 increasingly angry messages from Brenda, the last one threatening immediate termination if Maya didn't show up early. "I didn't see these," Maya said, grabbing her work uniform from the plastic bin. "Give me 5 minutes and I'll be ready." 5 minutes was 25 minutes ago, Brenda snapped. "You know what? I think inheriting money has gone to your head already. Maybe you need a reality check about how the real world works." Maya paused in pulling on her black pants. "What does that mean?" Brenda's smile was nasty. "It means I called in Maya Santos to cover your shifts. All of them. Permanently. You're fired, Maya. Effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Maya sank onto her bed, still holding her uniform shirt. "You can't do that. I've never missed a shift. I've never even been late. I can do whatever I want. It's my business." Brenda moved toward the door, then turned back with mock concern. "Of course, if you want to beg for your job back, I might consider it. But first, you'd need to show me you understand your place in this town." "My place?" "Sign over that cemetery to people who know what to do with it. Stop making waves. Stop acting like you're something special just because some crazy old man left you his problems." Brenda's voice turned vicious. "You're still the same foster kid nobody wanted, Maya. A piece of paper doesn't change that." After Brenda left, Maya sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Losing her job meant losing her apartment. She had maybe 2 weeks' worth of rent saved, and that was if she didn't eat. The rational part of her mind whispered that $2 million would solve every problem she'd ever had. She could take the money, leave Millfield, and never look back. But the brass key seemed to pulse with warmth on her nightstand, and Maya found herself thinking about the photos Ezra had kept of her. Someone had believed she was worth watching over, worth protecting. Maybe it was time to stop running from fights and start fighting back. She dressed quickly and walked the 6 blocks to Murphy's diner, hoping against hope that Brenda had been bluffing. But through the window she could see Maya Santos, Father Miguel's niece, wearing Maya's usual apron and taking orders from the Rotary Club members. Maria caught sight of her and waved sadly, mouthing, "I'm sorry," through the glass.
Maya turned away and nearly collided with Tom Briggs, the owner of Briggs Hardware where her apartment was located. Tom was a decent man in his 60s who'd always been fair with her, but his expression this morning was troubled. "Maya, I'm glad I ran into you. We need to talk." They walked back toward the hardware store in uncomfortable silence. Tom unlocked the shop and led her to his cluttered office in the back, where he poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked older than Maya herself. "I got a call last night from the city planning office. Apparently there are some concerns about the safety of the apartments above my store." Maya's heart sank. What kind of concerns? "Fire code violations, electrical issues, the kind of thing that gets a place condemned." Tom looked miserable as he spoke. "Maya, I've been renting those apartments for 15 years without a single complaint from any inspector. This is harassment, pure and simple. Because of the cemetery. Because someone wants you to feel pressure from every angle." Tom leaned forward. "I'm not going to throw you out, but I have to be honest. If they find violations and shut me down, I lose my business. I've got a wife and grandkids to think about." Maya stared into her coffee, watching her reflection waver on the dark surface. "How long do I have?" "The inspection is scheduled tomorrow morning. If I were you, I'd start looking for alternatives." Maya left the hardware store feeling like the walls of her life were closing in from every direction. No job, no apartment, and now she was learning exactly how much power the people who wanted her inheritance were willing to use against her. She walked aimlessly through downtown Millfield, noting how many people who usually greeted her with at least basic politeness now seemed to find reasons to look away. At the corner of Main and Oak, she nearly ran into Mrs. Henderson from the law office. The older woman grabbed Maya's arm with surprising strength, her usual professional demeanor cracking to reveal something desperate underneath.
"Maya, dear, you look troubled," Mrs. Henderson said, though her concern felt performative. "I heard about your job situation. Such a shame when young people make poor choices." "I didn't make any choices," Maya replied, trying to pull her arm free. "I literally inherited something yesterday." "But you're choosing to keep it instead of doing what's best for everyone involved." Mrs. Henderson's grip tightened. "Maya, I've worked in this town for 30 years. I've seen what happens to people who fight the natural order of things. It doesn't end well." "What natural order?" Maya finally yanked her arm free, noting the red marks Mrs. Henderson's fingers had left. "You mean the order where powerful people get what they want and everyone else suffers?" Mrs. Henderson's mask slipped completely. "You stupid girl! You have no idea what you're playing with. That cemetery has been nothing but trouble for this town, and your great-uncle was—" "What?" Dr. Whitmore's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. She appeared beside them as if materializing from thin air, her historian's bag slung over her shoulder and her expression dangerous. "Please, Mrs. Henderson, finish that thought." The legal secretary's face went pale. "Dr. Whitmore, I was trying to help Maya understand the situation." "By threatening her? By grabbing her hard enough to leave bruises?" Dr. Whitmore stepped between Maya and Mrs. Henderson, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by something fierce. "I think Maya understands the situation perfectly. The question is whether you understand yours." Mrs. Henderson backed away, her professional composure crumbling. "This isn't over. You can't protect her forever, Sarah. This town has ways of dealing with problems." After she hurried away, Dr. Whitmore examined Maya's arm with gentle fingers. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised." Maya was shaking slightly, more from anger than for fear. "Is everyone in this town going to come after me?" "Not everyone, but enough that we need to show you what Ezra left you. Now." Dr. Whitmore checked her watch. "Can you meet me at the cemetery in an hour?
There are some people I want you to meet first." Maya spent the intervening time walking the perimeter of Willowbrook Cemetery, trying to understand why 47 acres of graves could inspire such desperate greed. The property was beautiful, she had to admit. Rolling hills dotted with ancient oaks, stone pathways that curved gracefully between burial plots, and a view of the mountains that developers would kill for. But it was also clearly a cemetery, with hundreds of marked graves and obvious historical significance. Surely there were laws protecting such places. When Dr. Whitmore arrived, she wasn't alone. Father Miguel emerged from behind the main mausoleum, followed by two people Maya didn't recognize: an elderly black man in a professor's jacket and a middle-aged woman with prematurely gray hair and paint-stained fingers. "Maya, I'd like you to meet Professor James Washington from the university's history department and Ellen Blackwood. She's your cousin." Maya's world tilted. "My cousin?"
Ellen stepped forward with a shy smile that transformed her plain features into something lovely. "Second cousin, technically. My great-grandfather was Ezra's brother. I moved away from Millfield when I was 18, but I came back when I heard about Ezra's death." She gestured toward the cemetery. "This place? It's been in our family for over 150 years, Maya. We're the last of the Blackwoods." Professor Washington extended a weathered hand. "I've been researching your family's history for my doctoral students. The Blackwood legacy is remarkable and much more important than most people realize." "Important how?" Maya asked, though she was still processing the fact that she had family, real family, standing in front of her. "Perhaps it's better to show you," Dr. Whitmore said, producing her own brass key from her pocket. "Ezra left this with me 15 years ago, with instructions to use it only if something happened to him and you came looking for answers." She led them to the largest mausoleum in the cemetery, a granite structure that looked more like a small cathedral than a tomb. Maya had noticed it during her earlier walk. It stood apart from the other graves, surrounded by an ornate iron fence that seemed to be in much better repair than the rest of the cemetery's metalwork. Dr. Whitmore inserted her key into an almost invisible lock hidden behind a carved angel's wing. The heavy door swung open silently, revealing not the expected tomb, but a set of stone steps leading down into darkness. "Ezra spent 40 years expanding this," Professor Washington explained as they descended, their footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. "What started as a traditional burial vault became something much more significant." The stairs ended in a vast underground chamber, lit by electric lights that came on automatically as they entered. Maya's breath caught. The space was enormous, easily the size of a school gymnasium, with high vaulted ceilings and walls lined with what looked like safety deposit boxes. But in the center of it all, that made her knees weak, stacks upon stacks of wooden crates filled the space, each one carefully labeled with dates, names, and contents. But between the crates, Maya could see the gleam of gold bars, the sparkle of precious stones and bundles of currency from dozens of different countries. "My God," she whispered. "Welcome to the real Blackwood legacy," Ellen said softly. "Maya, your family wasn't just cemetery caretakers. We were guardians of the Underground Railroad treasure." Professor Washington moved to one of the walls and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. During the Civil War, enslaved people fleeing north often carried valuables: jewelry, gold, family heirlooms. Sometimes they died during the journey, and their fellow travelers would bury the valuables with them, planning to return for them after the war. But many never came back. Ezra's great-grandfather started collecting these items, not to steal them, but to preserve them, to keep them safe until the families could be found and the items returned. Over the decades, it became much more than that. Father Miguel opened one of the smaller crates, revealing neat stacks of gold coins. Holocaust survivors fleeing Europe, refugees from wars and genocides, people fleeing natural disasters.
For 150 years, the Blackwood family has been the secret keepers of treasures that desperate people couldn't carry with them. Maya walked deeper into the chamber, her mind reeling. Each crate she passed was meticulously labeled, dates ranging from the 1850s to as recently as last year, names written in careful script, estimated values that made her eyes water. And in the center of it all, a massive vault that hadn't been opened.
"That's what your key opens," Ellen said, following Maya's gaze. "Ezra never told me what was in there. He said it was for the last Blackwood, the one who would decide the family's final legacy." Maya's hands shook as she approached the vault. The lock was ornate, clearly ancient, and when she inserted the brass key, it turned with surprising ease. The heavy door swung open to reveal documents. Thousands upon thousands of documents, photographs, and records. But laid across the top of the archive was a single folder marked, "For Maya, the truth about everything." Inside, Maya found a letter in Ezra's careful handwriting. "My dear great-niece, if you are reading this, then the vultures have come circling, and you need to understand what you've inherited. The treasure in this chamber is worth approximately $200 million at current market values, but its true worth goes far beyond money. Every item here belongs to someone. Families scattered by tragedy, survivors who fled with nothing, refugees who buried their heritage hoping to reclaim it someday. Our family has spent 5 generations trying to return these items to their rightful owners or their descendants. We've reunited hundreds of families with lost heirlooms. We've funded schools and hospitals and community centers in places where people lost everything. The records in this vault contain the genealogical research, the historical documentation, and the legal proof needed to continue this work. But more than that, they contain evidence of crimes, historical crimes that certain families in Millfield would prefer to keep buried. You see, Maya, not all of this treasure came from victims. Some of it came from perpetrators. Confederate gold stolen from freed slaves, Nazi wealth stolen from Jewish families, money laundered through Millfield banks by people who thought distance would clean their hands. The Henderson, Holt, and Chen families, they know what's down here. Their ancestors were complicit in some of the original thefts. If this information ever came to light, it would destroy their reputations and possibly result in criminal charges. That's why they want this land so badly. But the choice is yours, my dear. You can take the money and run, as they expect you to, or you can continue the family work. Either way, you now know the truth about what made this town wealthy and what price was paid for that wealth. Choose wisely and know that I am proud of the woman you've become. Your loving great-uncle, Ezra Blackwood. Maya sank into a chair that had been placed beside the vault, the letter trembling in her hands. Around her, the underground chamber seemed to pulse with the weight of generations of secrets. Now you understand, Dr. Whitmore said gently, why they're so desperate to get this land, and why your great-uncle never stopped fighting to protect it. Ellen moved to stand beside Maya's chair. The choice really is yours, cousin. No one would blame you for taking the money and leaving all this behind. It's a heavy burden to carry. But Professor Washington was studying Maya's face with interest. Though I suspect you're not the running type, there's something in your expression. You're angry. He was right. Maya was furious, not just at the people who were threatening her, but at the historical injustices represented by every crate in the chamber. How many families had spent generations wondering what happened to their heritage?
How many refugees had died believing their children would never know their true history? "There's more," Father Miguel said quietly. Ezra suspected he was being watched in his final months. He set up a dead man's switch. If anything happened to him, certain documents were to be sent to the FBI, the State Attorney General, and several major newspapers. But the switch requires both keys to activate, yours and mine. Ezra was protecting you, Maya. He didn't want you to face this alone or without understanding the full consequences.
Maya stood up slowly, walking back through the chamber and taking in the magnitude of what she'd inherited. $200 million worth of stolen treasure, historical evidence that could destroy powerful families, and the responsibility for continuing a legacy of justice that had spanned 5 generations. A sound from above made them all freeze. Footsteps, heavy boots on the mausoleum floor. "Well, well," Councilman Holt's voice echoed down the stairs. "Look what we have here, a family reunion." He appeared at the bottom of the steps, flanked by 2 men Maya didn't recognize, private security from the look of them. Behind them came Margaret Chen, her red lipstick a slash of color in the underground chamber's electric lighting. "Quite an impressive setup," Margaret Chen said, her gaze taking in the treasure with obvious avarice. "Much more extensive than our family suspected." "This is private property," Dr. Whitmore said firmly. "You're trespassing." Councilman Holt laughed. "Private property that's about to be condemned for safety violations. Amazing how many problems old buildings develop when you know where to look." He gestured to his companions. "These gentlemen are from a private security firm. They'll be helping to secure the area while the city conducts its investigation." One of the security guards moved to block the exit, while the other began photographing the treasure with a professional camera. Maya realized with growing horror that this had been planned. They'd known about the chamber, known she would eventually be brought here, and prepared accordingly. "You can't do this," Ellen said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is theft, plain and simple." "This is civic responsibility," Margaret Chen replied smoothly. "This chamber represents a clear public safety hazard. All of these items need to be properly cataloged and secured by the appropriate authorities." "Authorities like yourselves?" Professor Washington stepped forward, his academic demeanor hiding what Maya was beginning to recognize as considerable steel. "I think not. This collection has been legally owned by the Blackwood family for over a century." "Legal ownership that's about to be challenged in court. Funny how legal documents have a way of going missing sometimes, or being revealed as forgeries. The state takes a very dim view of treasure hunting on historical properties." Maya felt the walls closing in around her. Not just the physical walls of the underground chamber, but the metaphorical walls of corruption and power that seemed to control every aspect of Millfield. These people had manipulated her entire life, kept her from her family, and now they were brazenly stealing her inheritance while hiding behind legal technicalities. But as she looked around at the faces of the people who'd come to support her, Dr. Whitmore with her fierce protectiveness, Father Miguel with his quiet moral authority, Ellen with her family loyalty, and Professor Washington with his academic integrity, Maya realized she wasn't alone this time. For the first time in her life, she had people willing to fight for her. "I want to make a deal," Maya said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. Everyone turned to look at her. Councilman Holt's eyebrows rose. "Now you're being sensible. What kind of deal?" Maya pulled out her phone and began recording. "The kind where I document everything you just said about making legal documents disappear and challenging legal ownership through fraudulent means. The kind where I live stream this entire conversation to social media." The silence that followed was deadly.
Margaret Chen's face went white beneath her makeup, and Councilman Holt's confident expression cracked. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction.
Maya held up her phone, showing the recording in progress. "Try me. I've got nothing left to lose. You've already taken my job, my apartment, and my sense of safety. But you haven't taken my voice." She looked directly into the camera. "My name is Maya Chen, and I'm live streaming from a hidden chamber beneath Willowbrook Cemetery in Millfield. I've just inherited the cemetery from my great-uncle, and powerful people in this town are trying to steal it through intimidation and fraud. They've just admitted on camera to planning to falsify legal documents and abuse their government positions for personal gain." The number of viewers was climbing rapidly. Dr. Whitmore had clearly shared the link, and it was being shared again by others. Comments began pouring in, and Maya realized that her story was spreading beyond Millfield. "You have no idea what you're doing," Margaret Chen hissed. "You'll destroy this entire town with your naive idealism." "Good," Maya said simply. "Maybe it's time this town was destroyed and rebuilt on something other than corruption and stolen wealth." Councilman Holt gestured to his security guards, but they hesitated. Being recorded while assaulting a young woman in front of a live audience was evidently beyond what they'd been paid to do. "This isn't over," Holt warned. "There are legal ways to deal with troublemakers. I'm counting on it, because I have 150 years of documentation about how this town's founding families acquired their wealth, and I'm betting that some of those legal ways aren't going to look so legal once they're exposed to sunlight." As the interlopers retreated up the stairs, Maya continued recording, panning the camera across the treasure chamber and explaining what she'd learned about her family's legacy. The viewer count was climbing into the thousands, and the comments were a mix of outrage, support, and disbelief. But it was a comment from someone named Jenny Washington, D.C. that caught her attention. "My great-grandmother always said our family jewelry was buried with the Underground Railroad. She described a locket that's been lost for 150 years. Is there any way to check if you have records?" Maya looked at Professor Washington, who was smiling despite the tension. "That's my granddaughter. And yes, we can check. That's exactly what this is all about." As Maya ended the livestream, she realized that whatever happened next, there was no going back. This story is getting intense. If you want to see how Maya fights back against the corruption, please share this video with someone who loves mystery stories, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales like this one. She'd chosen her side in a fight that had been brewing for generations, but for the first time since inheriting the cemetery, she felt like herself again. Not the powerless foster kid who'd learned to accept whatever adults decided was best for her, but someone with the power to choose justice over convenience. The war for Willowbrook Cemetery had officially begun. The live stream changed everything overnight. By morning, Maya's phone was buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, genealogists, historians, and families who thought they might have connections to items in the Blackwood collection. But more importantly, it had caught the attention of people with real power, people who existed beyond the insular corruption of Millfield. Maya was drinking coffee in Dr. Whitmore's kitchen when the first knock came at 7 a.m. Through the window, she could see 2 black sedans with government plates parked in the driveway. "FBI," Dr. Whitmore said calmly, as if federal agents showed up at her house every day. "Sometimes you need bigger fish to deal with smaller sharks." The lead agent was a woman in her 40s named Detective Sarah Martinez, whose no-nonsense demeanor reminded Maya of Dr. Whitmore. Behind her came Agent Robert Kim from the Treasury Department, and a man who introduced himself simply as Mr. Peterson from the State Attorney General's office. "Ms. Chen," Agent Martinez said, settling into Dr. Whitmore's living room with a recording device and a thick folder. "We've been investigating financial irregularities in Millfield for several months. Your live stream provided some very interesting context." Maya glanced at Dr. Whitmore, who nodded encouragingly. "What kind of irregularities?" Agent Kim opened his laptop and turned it toward Maya. The screen showed bank records, property transfers, and what looked like complex financial flowcharts. Money laundering, primarily. Large sums moving through local banks and real estate transactions without adequate documentation. We've been trying to trace the source. And then you showed us a chamber full of historically stolen wealth. wealth that certain families in this town have apparently been very eager to access. Maya spent the next 3 hours walking the agents through everything she'd learned. Ezra's netter, the collection's history, the threats and intimidation she'd faced, and the recorded admission of planned document fraud. "Ms. Chen," Agent Martinez said, settling into Dr. Whitmore's living room with a recording device and a thick folder. "We've been investigating financial irregularities in Millfield for several months. Your live stream provided some very interesting context." Maya glanced at Dr. Whitmore, who nodded encouragingly. "What kind of irregularities?" Agent Kim opened his laptop and turned it toward Maya. The screen showed bank records, property transfers, and what looked like complex financial flowcharts. Money laundering, primarily. Large sums moving through local banks and real estate transactions without adequate documentation. We've been trying to trace the source. And then you showed us a chamber full of historically stolen wealth that certain families in this town have apparently been very eager to access. Maya spent the next 3 hours walking the agents through everything she'd learned. Ezra's letter, the collection's history, the threats and intimidation she'd faced, and the recorded admission of planned document fraud. "Ms. Chen," Agent Martinez said finally, "we're looking at potential RICO charges, historical war crimes, conspiracy, extortion, and about a dozen other federal violations. But, Ms. Chen, you need to understand, this investigation is going to take months, possibly years. These people have a lot of power and expensive lawyers." "What happens to me in the meantime?" Maya asked. Mr. Peterson smiled grimly. "That's the beautiful thing about federal jurisdiction. As of right now, Willowbrook Cemetery is under federal protection as a site of historical significance and potential evidence in an ongoing investigation. The local authorities can't touch it." An hour after the federal agents left, Maya's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was elderly, trembling with emotion. "Is this Maya Chen, the young lady with the cemetery?" "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Rose Goldman. I live in New York now, but my family fled Germany in 1939. We left everything behind, except a few pieces of jewelry my grandmother sewed into my mother's coat lining." The woman's voice broke. "I saw your live stream. In one of those crates, I think I saw my great-grandmother's wedding ring." Maya's chest tightened. "Can you describe it?" "Platinum with 3 small diamonds and an inscription inside. Eternal love, Samuel to Rebecca, 1895. It was the only thing we had left of our family history." Maya looked at Dr. Whitmore, who was already reaching for her coat. "Mrs. Goldman, would you be willing to travel to Millfield? I think we need to check something." They spent the rest of the day in the underground chamber with Professor Washington, carefully cataloging items and cross-referencing them with Ezra's meticulous records. The system was incredibly detailed. Each item had a photograph, a description, information about how it came to be in the collection, and any research that had been done to trace its ownership. Mrs. Goldman's ring was there, exactly as she'd described it, along with documentation showing it had been recovered from a refugee ship that sank off the coast of Virginia in 1940. Ezra's notes indicated he'd been trying to trace the Goldman family for over 20 years. "We found you," Maya said softly, placing the ring in Mrs. Goldman's trembling hands. The elderly woman broke down completely, clutching the ring to her chest as tears streamed down her face.
"I never thought I'd see it again," she whispered. "My mother died believing it was lost forever." But Mrs. Goldman wasn't the only one. Word was spreading through communities of survivors, refugees, and descendants of stolen wealth. Maya's phone rang constantly with stories. A Civil War-era family Bible thought lost in Sherman's March, jewelry stolen by Nazis and smuggled out of concentration camps, Native American artifacts taken during forced relocations. By the end of the week, Maya had verified and returned over 30 items to their rightful owners or descendants. Each reunion was emotionally devastating and healing at the same time. These weren't just objects, they were connections to lost history, proof that families had existed and mattered and been loved. But the returns were also having an unexpected effect on Millfield itself. News crews had arrived to cover the story, and suddenly the town was under national scrutiny. The carefully maintained facade of small-town charm was cracking under investigation, and people were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about how certain families had acquired their wealth and power. Maya was walking back from the post office. She'd been mailing documentation to families who couldn't travel to Millfield when she was approached by a woman she'd never seen before. She was in her 30s, professionally dressed, but her eyes were red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. "Are you Maya Chen?" the woman asked. "Yes. My name is Jessica Henderson. I'm Richard Henderson's daughter." She gestured toward a coffee shop. "Could we talk privately?" Maya hesitated. The Henderson family had been among her most aggressive antagonists, but something in Jessica's expression suggested this was different. They sat in a corner booth while Jessica fidgeted with her coffee cup. "I need to tell you something about my family, about what they did to yours." "What do you mean?" Jessica pulled out a manila folder. "I'm a lawyer. I work in Atlanta now, but I grew up here. After your live stream went viral, I went through my father's papers. I found things that made me sick." She opened the folder to reveal legal documents dating back to Maya's childhood, custody hearings, financial records, correspondence between her father and various officials. "My father orchestrated keeping you away from Ezra," Jessica said, her voice hollow. "He convinced the judge that Ezra was unstable, potentially dangerous. He had doctors submit false psychiatric evaluations. He bribed social workers to recommend against the placement." Maya stared at the documents, her vision blurring with rage. Why? Because even then, he knew about the treasure. His grandfather had been part of the original conspiracy. Families who knew about the Blackwood collection and wanted access to it. They'd been waiting generations for the right opportunity. Jessica's hands were shaking. "Maya, they destroyed your childhood from money. They kept you from the only family you had left because they wanted to steal your inheritance." The silence stretched between them until Maya finally spoke. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's wrong. Because I'm a mother now, and the thought of someone doing this to my child..." She wiped her eyes. "And because I want to help you destroy them, all of them." That evening, Maya was sitting in Ellen's hotel room. Her cousin had extended her stay indefinitely to help with the treasure returns, staring at Jessica Henderson's evidence. The documentation was damning, showing a decades-long conspiracy involving multiple city officials, judges, social workers, and business leaders.
"This is it," Ellen said, reading over the legal papers. "This is what we need to bring them all down." Dr. Whitmore was on the phone with Agent Martinez, walking her through the new evidence. Yes, conspiracy charges definitely apply, and civil rights violations. Maya was denied her constitutional right to family placement based on fraudulent evidence. But it was Father Miguel who asked the question that had been haunting Maya all day. What do you want to happen to them? You have the power now to choose justice or mercy. Maya looked around at the people who'd become her chosen family. Dr. Whitmore with her fierce protectiveness, Ellen with her family loyalty, Father Miguel with his moral guidance, Professor Washington with his commitment to historical truth. 6 months ago, she'd been completely alone in the world. Now she had people who would fight for her, who cared about her well-being, who saw her as more than just a foster kid nobody wanted. I want them to face consequences for what they did. But more than that, I want to make sure they can never do it to anyone else. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Henderson. My father just called an emergency city council meeting. I think they're planning something desperate. Maya showed the message to the group. Dr. Whitmore's expression turned grim. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. We need to be prepared for anything. They didn't have to wait long to find out what anything meant. At 10 p.m., Maya's phone rang with a call from the security system Dr. Whitmore had insisted on installing at the cemetery after the federal investigation began. Motion sensors had been triggered throughout the property. They arrived at Willowbrook to find chaos. Fire trucks and police cars filled the entrance, their lights painting the ancient trees and flashing red and blue. Smoke was rising from the direction of the main mausoleum. "What happened?" Maya demanded, running toward Chief of Police Danny Morrison, one of the few local officials who hadn't been implicated in the conspiracy. "Someone firebombed the mausoleum," Chief Morrison said grimly. "An anonymous tip came in claiming there was a gas leak, but by the time we got here, the place was already burning." Maya's heart stopped. "The chamber? All the records?" "That's the thing," Chief Morrison said, looking puzzled. "The fire was contained to the upper level. Whoever did this either didn't know about the underground chamber or they didn't want to damage it." Dr. Whitmore grabbed Maya's arm. "The federal evidence. Someone was trying to destroy the federal evidence, but they only knew about the upper level where Ezra kept his personal files." They watched as firefighters completed their work, the beautiful stone mausoleum now blackened and partially collapsed. But the entrance to the underground chamber was intact, protected by the same stone construction that had kept the treasure safe for generations. "This was a message," Professor Washington said quietly. "They're telling you they'll destroy everything you care about if you don't back down." Maya stared at the smoking ruins of her great-uncle's memorial, feeling something cold and hard settled in her chest. These people had taken her childhood, her family, her sense of safety. Now they were desecrating the graves of the dead to protect their own crimes. "No," she said, her voice carrying across the cemetery. "This was a mistake. They just showed the world exactly who they really are."
She pulled out her phone and started recording again, this time standing in front of the burned mausoleum with the federal agents' cars visible in the background. "My name is Maya Chen, and 6 hours ago I provided federal agents with evidence that powerful families in Millfield have been conspiring for decades to steal historically significant treasure. 2 hours ago, someone firebombed the cemetery where that evidence was stored." She gestured to the smoking ruins. "This is what corruption looks like when it's desperate. This is what powerful people do when they're about to be held accountable for their crimes." The live stream was shared thousands of times within the first hour. But more importantly, it caught the attention of investigative journalists who'd been following the story. By morning, Millfield was crawling with reporters from major news networks, all asking the same question. What were local officials so desperate to hide that they'd resort to arson? The answer came faster than anyone expected. Jessica Henderson called an emergency press conference, standing on the steps of the courthouse with boxes of evidence and a team of lawyers she'd brought from Atlanta. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the assembled crowd, "I'm here to confess to conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations committed by my family and others in positions of power in this community. I'm also here to provide evidence that will allow federal prosecutors to bring criminal charges against everyone involved." Maya watched from the crowd as Jessica detailed the conspiracy, how the Henderson, Holt, and Chen families had known about the Blackwood treasure for generations, how they'd manipulated the legal system to keep Maya from her inheritance, how they'd planned to use their government positions to seize the property through fraudulent condemnation proceedings.
Most importantly, Jessica continued, I want to apologize to Maya Chen for the childhood that was stolen from her, and to the memory of Ezra Blackwood, who spent his final years being harassed and threatened for protecting what was right. The crowd was silent as Jessica finished her statement. Then, slowly, people began to applaud. Not everyone. Maya could see several faces in the crowd that were twisted with anger and betrayal. But enough people that she realized Millfield itself was changing, that maybe there had always been good people here who'd been silenced by the same power structures that had targeted her. Agent Martinez stepped forward to the microphone. Based on evidence provided by Miss Henderson and discovered during our investigation, federal charges are being filed against 12 individuals, including sitting city council members, former judges, and prominent business leaders. Additionally, the Treasury Department is pursuing civil asset forfeiture against properties and accounts that appear to have been purchased with laundered money. Maya felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Father Miguel smiling at her with pride. How does it feel to win? Maya looked around at the crowd, at the federal agents, at the reporters documenting the fall of people who'd seemed untouchable just days ago. But her eyes kept returning to the cemetery visible in the distance, to the blackened mausoleum where her great-uncle's memory had been desecrated. It doesn't feel like winning yet, she said honestly. It feels like the beginning of something. The real work starts now. 2 weeks later, Maya stood in the underground chamber as FBI agents finished cataloging evidence. The corrupt officials had been arrested, and she finally understood what Ezra truly left her. Professional archivists worked alongside genealogists and historians, carefully cataloging and researching every item in the collection. The chaos of that first desperate day had been replaced with methodical, respectful scholarship. Maya, you need to see this, Ellen called from across the chamber, where she'd been working with a team from the Smithsonian. She held up a small wooden box that Maya recognized from Ezra's most restricted collection, items he'd marked as awaiting further research. Inside the box was a simple gold ring and a faded photograph of a young Native American woman. The accompanying documentation, written in Ezra's careful script, told a story that made Maya's chest tighten with emotion. Sarah Running Bear, Cherokee Nation, died 1838 during forced removal to Oklahoma Territory. Ring recovered from Trail of Tears burial site, 1952. Family lineage traced through BIA records. Descendants located in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, 1987. Family contacted but declined retrieval. Stated ring should remain with other sacred objects until the right time comes. Ellen looked up from the documentation. Maya, this was written over 30 years ago. Ezra found her family, but they told him to wait. Wait for what? Look at the last entry. Ellen pointed to a note written in different ink, clearly added much later. Updated 2019. Sarah Running Bear's great-great-granddaughter, Dr. Mary Littlefeather, elected as first Native American member of Millfield City Council. Per family instructions, ring to be returned when Cherokee representation restored to local government. Maya stared at the notation, understanding it was dawning slowly. He knew. Somehow he knew this day would come. The story of Dr. Mary Littlefeather had been one of the unexpected consequences of the federal investigation. When Councilman Holt and 2 other council members were arrested, special elections had been called to fill their seats. Dr. Littlefeather, a pediatrician who'd moved to Millfield 5 years earlier, had run on a platform of transparency and historical reconciliation. She'd won by the largest margin in the town's recorded history. Maya pulled out her phone and called Dr. Littlefeather's office. Dr. Littlefeather, this is Maya Chen. I think I have something that belongs to your family. The conversation that followed was one of the most meaningful of Maya's life. Dr. Littlefeather's voice broke as Maya described to Ring and read Ezra's documentation aloud. They arranged to meet that evening at the cemetery, and Dr. Littlefeather promised to bring her grandmother, who was visiting from Oklahoma. As Maya hung up, she realized that this was what her great-uncle had really left her. Not just treasure, but the opportunity to heal wounds that had festered for generations. Each item returned, each family reunited with their history. Each acknowledgement of past wrongs was a small act of justice that rippled outward in ways she was only beginning to understand. The transformation of Millfield itself had been remarkable to witness. With several key power brokers facing federal charges, space had opened up for new voices and new leadership. The tourism that initially came for the scandal had evolved into something more meaningful. People coming to learn about the Underground Railroad history, the Cherokee heritage, and the complex story of a cemetery that had preserved difficult truths for a century. Maya had used some of the treasure, items whose original owners could not be traced despite exhaustive research, to establish the Blackwood Foundation. The organization funded genealogical research, supported refugee resettlement programs, and provided grants to communities working to recover lost cultural heritage. But more than that, it served as a model for how historical wealth could be used to address historical wrongs. Maya, Professor Washington, called from the vault area where he'd been working with a team of graduate students to digitize Ezra's historical records. There's something here you need to see.
He led her to a section of the vault she'd never explored fully. Boxes marked current cases, active research. Inside, Maya found files that took her breath away. Ezra hadn't just been preserving historical artifacts. He'd been actively working to solve modern injustices. "Look at this," Professor Washington said, opening a file marked Martinez Family, 2018. Inside were photographs, legal documents, and correspondence. The Martinez family fled El Salvador in 2017. They had to leave behind a small collection of pre-Columbian artifacts that had been in their family for generations. Ezra was working with immigration lawyers and cultural heritage organizations to help them recover the items legally. Maya flipped through similar files: a Bosnian family's war-torn photographs, a Syrian refugee's collection of ancient coins, a Vietnamese family's ancestral jewelry left behind during the fall of Saigon. In each case, Ezra had been using his resources and connections to reunite families with their cultural heritage, even when the items weren't physically in his collection. He was running a private family reunification service, Maya said, awed by the scoop of her great-uncle's work. This goes way beyond the cemetery. Ellen appeared beside them, holding another file. "Maya, this one has your name on it." The file, labeled Maya Chen Future Plans, contained documents that made Maya's knees weak. College applications to universities she'd never heard of, scholarship letters from institutions she'd never applied to, and a full academic plan mapped out through a doctoral degree in international human rights law. "He was planning my education?" Maya whispered. "Even though he couldn't contact me, he was preparing for my future." At the bottom of the file was a letter addressed to her. "Maya, if you're reading this, it means you've chosen to continue the family work rather than take the money and run. I cannot tell you how proud that makes me, though I'm not surprised. The Blackwood's stubbornness runs true." The files in this section represent the future of our mission. The world is smaller now than it was when my great-grandfather started this work. Families are scattered by conflicts happening right now, not just historical injustices. There are refugees arriving in America every day who left behind everything that connected them to their heritage. I've established relationships with immigration lawyers, cultural heritage organizations, and international aid groups. The infrastructure is there for you to expand this work globally if you choose. But remember, this is your choice, not your obligation. You've already given enough. Whatever you decide, Know that you have made an old man's heart sing with joy. All my love, Uncle Ezra. Maya sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd inherited. It wasn't just treasure or even a cemetery. It was a global network dedicated to preserving human dignity in the face of displacement and loss. That evening, as promised, Dr. Mary Littlefeather arrived at the cemetery with her grandmother, a tiny woman in her 80s who moved with the careful grace of someone who'd lived through history. Mrs. Elizabeth Littlefeather wore traditional Cherokee dress for the occasion, her silver hair braided with colorful ribbons. Maya met them at the cemetery's main entrance, which had been rebuilt after the fire with help from Cherokee artisans who donated their time. The new gates incorporated traditional Cherokee symbols alongside the original Victorian ironwork, creating something that honored both the cemetery's history and its connection to the land's original inhabitants.
"This is sacred ground," Mrs. Littlefeather said as they walked toward the mausoleum. Her voice was soft, but carried the authority of someone who'd witnessed decades of struggle and survival. Not just because of the dead buried here, but because of the living who found refuge here. Dr. Littlefeather explained as they walked, "My family's oral history includes stories about this cemetery. During the worst times, when Cherokee people weren't allowed to gather openly, families would meet here. Ezra's great-grandfather allowed it, even when it was dangerous for him to do so." They descended into the underground chamber where Maya had arranged for the ring ceremony to take place privately. Mrs. Littlefeather gasped when she saw the vast collection, her eyes filling with tears. So much history, so much pain is preserved alongside so much love. Maya placed Sarah Running Bear's ring in Mrs. Littlefeather's hands, along with all of Ezra's research about her family line. The elderly woman held the ring up to the light, studying the simple gold band that had traveled from the Trail of Tears to a hidden chamber beneath a small-town cemetery. "Sarah was my great-great-grandmother," Mrs. Littlefeather said. "Family stories say she was a storyteller, a keeper of our oral traditions. When they forced us to leave, she made my great-great-grandfather promise that her stories would survive even if she didn't." She slipped the ring onto her finger. "This ring heard all those stories. Now it can come home and hear new ones." The ceremony was simple but profound. Mrs. Littlefeather sang a traditional Cherokee prayer song, while Dr. Littlefeather spoke about the importance of cultural preservation and historical reconciliation. Maya found herself crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense that something broken was being healed. Afterwards, as they walked back through the cemetery, Mrs. Littlefeather stopped beside a headstone Maya had never noticed before. It was older than most of the others, with Cherokee symbols carved alongside English text. "James Blackwood, 1823-1887, friend to the Cherokee Nation, keeper of sacred trust." Mrs. Littlefeather looked at Maya with knowing eyes. "Your family's commitment to justice goes back further than you know, child. This land remembers kindness." Over the following months, word spread about the Blackwood Foundation's work. Maya found herself traveling regularly to immigration courts where she testified about the importance of cultural heritage preservation, to universities where she spoke about historical justice, to refugee resettlement centers where she helped families document their lost heritage. But it was the smaller moments that meant the most. Like the afternoon when Mrs. Goldman from New York brought her granddaughter to see the cemetery where their family ring had been kept safe. Or the day when the Martinez family's pre-Columbian artifacts were successfully returned from El Salvador, reuniting them with pottery their ancestors had made 500 years ago. The cemetery itself had become something Maya never could have imagined, a pilgrimage site for people seeking connections to lost history. Families came from around the world to walk among the graves and understand how one family's commitment to justice had preserved treasures beyond price. Maya had also made peace with her own history.
Working with therapists funded by the Blackwood Foundation's Victim Services Program, she'd processed the trauma of her childhood and learned to see her survival not as something to be ashamed of, but as evidence of her strength. The foster care experience that had once made her feel powerless now informed her understanding of displacement and loss in ways that made her more effective at helping others.
1 year after inheriting the cemetery, Maya stood in the rebuilt mausoleum, now a proper memorial to Ezra and a meeting space for the Foundation's work. The underground chamber had been expanded and properly climate-controlled, with areas designated for research, storage, and family reunification ceremonies. Ellen had moved to Millfield permanently, serving as the Foundation's Director of Genealogical Research. Father Miguel had become the chaplain for the Refugee Services Program. Dr. Whitmore had left her county position to focus full-time on historical preservation. Professor Washington had established a graduate program in heritage recovery studies. Even Jessica Henderson had joined the team, using her legal expertise to navigate international repatriation laws. "Any regrets?" Ellen asked as they reviewed the Foundation's annual report. In its first year, they had returned over 300 items to families, provided support to 150 refugee families, and documented 2,000 cases of historical injustice. Maya looked around at the space that had once seemed like a tomb, but now hummed with life and purpose. Through the windows, she could see visitors walking respectfully among the graves, reading the historical markers that now told the full story of Willowbrook Cemetery's role in American history. "Only one?" Maya said. "I wish Uncle Ezra could see what we've built." "Who says he can't?" Father Miguel said, joining their conversation. "I've been working in this cemetery for 3 years now, and I can tell you with certainty, Ezra Blackwood's spirit is very much present here. This place has a sense of peace it never had when he was alive and under constant threat." As if to emphasize his point, a warm breeze moved through the chamber, despite the closed windows, rustling the papers on their desks and carrying the faint scent of the roses that now bloomed throughout the cemetery. Maya smiled, feeling that familiar sense of belonging that had first drawn her to this place. She'd started as an orphan with nothing, became an heiress by accident, and chosen to transform herself into something she'd never imagined, a guardian of other people's most precious memories. But the work was far from over. Each week brought new cases, new families seeking lost heritage, and new opportunities to choose justice over convenience. The world was full of displacement and loss, but it was also full of people committed to preserving what mattered most. 3 years later. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 3 years after Maya had first pushed through the rusty gates of Willowbrook Cemetery. She was in her office, a converted section of the Victorian caretaker's house that she now called home, when Ellen knocked and entered with an expression Maya had learned to recognize. "We've got a big one," Ellen said, placing the letter on Maya's desk. "This came through the State Department. A family in Afghanistan has been trying to recover a collection of ancient manuscripts that were hidden during the Taliban's first rule." Maya opened the letter, scanning the formal diplomatic language until she reached the heart of the matter. The Ahmadi family had protected a collection of 13th-century Persian poetry manuscripts for generations. When the Taliban first came to power, they'd given the manuscripts to a cousin who was fleeing to America. But the cousin had died in a refugee camp before reaching safety. The manuscripts had disappeared into the chaos of displacement and international aid efforts. Dr. Ahmadi thinks the manuscripts might have ended up with a relief organization that was operating out of Millfield in the 1990s, Ellen continued. The same organization that helped connect several other Afghan families with lost items. Maya set down the letter, already knowing where this was leading. The relief organization had been one of Ezra's private partnerships, a group he'd supported financially and worked with to help refugees preserve their cultural heritage. If the manuscripts had come through that pipeline, they were almost certainly somewhere in the Blackwood collection. "Have you checked the records?" "Already on it.
Professor Washington found references to religious texts, Persian origin, in a 1996 intake log. But get this, there's a note that the items were deemed too sensitive for standard processing and were stored in a special section. Maya raised an eyebrow. Special section? Apparently, your great-uncle built more than one hidden chamber. There's another vault we haven't found yet. An hour later, Maya found herself back in the underground chamber with Ellen, Professor Washington, and Dr. Mary Littlefeather, who'd become an unofficial advisor to the Foundation. They'd been systematically exploring every inch of the space, looking for additional hidden areas that Ezra might have constructed. "Here," Dr. Littlefeather said, running her hands along a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. "The stone pattern is slightly different, and there's a small airflow." Professor Washington brought over one of the high-powered flashlights they used for detailed archive work. In the concentrated beam, Maya could just make out hairline cracks in the mortar that formed an almost invisible rectangular outline. "Another key-operated entrance," Ellen observed. "But which key?" Maya pulled out the original brass key that had started everything, but the lock, when they found it hidden behind a carved symbol, was clearly designed for a different key entirely. She was about to suggest they call in a locksmith when she remembered something. "Dr. Whitmore mentioned that Ezra left her 2 keys. We only used one of them." A quick phone call confirmed it. Dr. Whitmore arrived 20 minutes later with a silver key that was clearly much newer than Maya's brass one. "She gave me this one separately," she explained. "Said it was for the 2nd generation of work." The silver key turned smoothly, and the hidden panel swung inward to reveal a smaller but equally sophisticated chamber. This space was organized differently, more like a modern archive than a treasure vault. Climate-controlled storage units lined the walls, each one labeled with detailed information about contents, provenance, and research status. "My God," Professor Washington whispered, scanning the labels. "This is all modern stuff, items from conflicts in the last 30 years. Maya found the unit labeled Afghanistan Collection 1990-01 and carefully opened it. Inside, protected by museum-quality preservation materials, were the manuscripts Dr. Ahmadi's family had described. But they weren't alone. The collection also included jewelry, photographs, traditional clothing, and what appears to be a complete set of handwritten genealogies. "There are 12 families represented here," Ellen said, reading through Ezra's documentation. "All Afghan refugees who ended up in different parts of the world. Ezra was working to reunite them with their heritage when the September 11th attacks happened and everything became more complicated." Maya picked up one of the manuscripts, marveling at the beautiful calligraphy and illuminated borders. Even she could see that these were priceless artifacts, not just for their monetary value, but as representatives of centuries of Persian literary tradition. "Dr. Ahmadi's family has been fighting the Taliban to preserve cultural heritage," Dr. Littlefeather said, reading from the letter. "They've been hiding and protecting manuscripts and artifacts at great personal risk. Getting these back to them isn't just about family heritage, it's about preserving knowledge for future generations." Maya nodded, already thinking through the logistics. Returning items to families in Afghanistan would require working with international agencies, cultural heritage organizations, and probably several governments. But over the past 3 years, the Blackwood Foundation had built relationships with exactly those kinds of organizations. "Let's do it. All of it. Let's find all 12 families and return everything."
6 months later. The ceremony took place at the newly constructed Blackwood Center for Cultural Heritage, a building that had risen where the old town hall once stood, after the corruption trials had resulted in several city buildings being sold to pay legal settlements. The center housed the Foundation's expanded operations, including a research library, a genealogy lab, and a permanent exhibition about the Underground Railroad's history in Millfield. Maya stood before an audience that included not just the local community, but representatives from 12 countries and numerous international organizations. Dr. Ahmadi had traveled from Kabul specifically for the ceremony, despite the considerable dangers such a trip represented. "Today, we return not just objects, but connections," Maya said, addressing the assembled crowd.
Each item we've preserved represents a family's identity, a community's memory, a culture's continuity. When we return these items to their rightful owners, we are acknowledging that heritage belongs to the people who created it, regardless of the circumstances that separated them from it. One by one, families came forward to receive their returned heritage. Dr. Ahmadi wept openly as she held the Persian manuscripts that had been in her family for over 700 years. A Somali family in Minneapolis received photographs and jewelry that had been lost during their flight from civil war. A Bosnian family in St. Louis was reunited with traditional clothing that had been in her family since the Ottoman Empire. But the most powerful moment came when Mrs. Elizabeth Littlefeather, now in her mid-80s, presented Maya with a special gift on behalf of the Cherokee Nation. It was a medallion made from silver and turquoise, inscribed with Cherokee symbols that meant Keeper of Sacred Trust. "This is a title that must be earned," Mrs. Littlefeather explained to the audience. "It goes to someone who understands that preserving culture is not about owning objects, but about serving communities. Maya Chen has shown us what it means to be a true guardian of heritage." After the ceremony, Maya found herself on the cemetery's main hill, looking out over the valley where millfields spread below. The town looked different now, cleaner, more prosperous, with new businesses that catered to the heritage tourism that had grown around the Blackwood story. But more importantly, it felt different. The corruption that had poisoned local government for generations had been replaced by transparent leadership and genuine community engagement. Ellen joined her on the hill, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the new cafe that had opened in the old bank building. "Penny for your thoughts?" "I was thinking about that first day, when I was so angry and scared and alone. I never could have imagined this." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken their money and run?" Maya considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I probably would have ended up in some city, living comfortably but anonymously. Maybe I would have been happy. But I wouldn't have been myself. The real myself." Maya gestured toward the cemetery, where families were still visiting graves and reading the historical markers that told the complete story of the site's significance. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Whitmore approached from the direction of the center, carrying a folder that Maya recognized as containing new cases. "I hate to interrupt your moment of reflection, but we've got 3 new families who think they might have items in our collection, including one that's particularly urgent, a Syrian family with children who need documentation of their heritage for asylum proceedings."
Maya took the folder, already scanning the case summaries. Each one represented families in crisis, people who'd lost everything except hope that somewhere, someone had preserved what mattered most to them. "The work never ends, does it?" Ellen observed. "No," Maya said, closing the folder. "But that's the point. As long as there are people being displaced, as long as there are families separated from their heritage, there's work to do." 5 years later. The documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, but Maya watched it for the first time in the Blackwood Center's auditorium, surrounded by the community that had become her family. The Keepers, a story of heritage and hope, told the story of the Blackwood Foundation's work, but more than that, it told the stories of families who'd been reunited with their lost heritage. Maya found herself crying during the segment about Mrs. Goldman, who'd passed away 2 years earlier, but had lived long enough to see her family's ring return to its ancestral home in New York. The documentary showed her granddaughter wearing the ring at her wedding, continuing a tradition that had nearly been lost forever. "You realize you're famous now," Ellen whispered as the credits rolled and the audience applauded. Maya made a face. "That's not the point." "I know it's not, but fame means resources, and resources mean we can help more families." She was right. The documentary's success had brought the Blackwood Foundation to international attention, resulting in partnerships with museums, universities, and governments around the world.
The little cemetery in Millfield had become the headquarters for a global network dedicated to cultural heritage preservation and refugee support. But fame also brought challenges. Maya now spent much of her time traveling, speaking at conferences, and meeting with potential partners. The simple work of research and family reunification that she loved most had to be balanced with the administrative responsibilities of running a major international organization. "I've been thinking," Maya said as they walked through the cemetery after the screening, "about expanding the leadership team, bringing in people who love administrative work so I can focus on family work." Ellen nodded. "You know I'll support whatever you decide. But Maya, don't lose sight of how much you've accomplished. This place, this work, these families you've helped, it's a legacy worth being proud of." They paused beside Ezra's restored grave, which was now marked with a proper headstone and surrounded by flowers that visitors left regularly. The inscription read simply, "Ezra Blackwood, 1945-2018, Guardian of Sacred Trust, Beloved Great Uncle." "I think he'd be proud," Maya said, touching the warm stone. "I think he'd be amazed," Ellen replied. "You've done more in 5 years than he managed in 40. "I had help. He had to do it alone." A soft wind moved through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of the ancient oaks and carrying the scent of the roses that now bloomed throughout the grounds. Maya had learned to recognize these moments, times when the cemetery seemed to be acknowledging the conversations happening within its boundaries. "Did you ever find out what happened to the money? The original $2 million they offered you?" Maya smiled. "I heard through Jessica Henderson that it was supposedly going to be a loan backed by properties they didn't actually own. If I had taken it, I would have ended up owing them money instead of gaining anything. So even their bribe was fraudulent. Everything about those people was fraudulent. That's why they couldn't understand someone who was genuinely trying to do the right thing." 10 years later, Maya's daughter Emma was 7 years old and had already decided she wanted to be a heritage detective like her mother. She'd inherited Maya's dark eyes and stubborn chin, but her personality was pure sunshine, confident in a way Maya had never been at her age, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and belonged somewhere.
"Mama, tell me the story again," Emma said, as they walked through the cemetery on a warm spring evening, "about how you found the treasure and saved all the families." Maya smiled, adjusting her daughter's backpack as they headed toward the mausoleum. "Which part of the story do you want to hear?" "The beginning, when you were scared and alone and didn't know you were brave yet." It was Emma's favorite part of the story, not the dramatic confrontations or the treasure discovery, but the moment when Maya had to choose between safety and purpose. Maya understood why. At 7, Emma was old enough to understand that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what was right despite being afraid. They settled on the steps of the mausoleum as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the cemetery in golden light. Maya began the story the way Emma liked it. Once upon a time, there was a girl who thought she had nothing, until she discovered she had everything that mattered. As she spoke, Maya's husband David emerged from the center building, carrying their infant son Michael, and followed by Ellen's teenage daughter Sophie, who'd been helping with research for her summer internship. The cemetery was alive with the sounds of family, children laughing, adults talking, the sense of home that Maya had always longed for and finally found. "And then what happened?" Emma prompted when Maya paused in the story. "Then she learned that having people who believe in you is more valuable than any treasure," Maya said, pulling her daughter closer, "and that home isn't a place, it's the people who choose to love you." Emma nodded seriously, as if this were important information she needed to remember. "And then she lived happily ever after?" Maya looked around at the cemetery where she'd found her purpose, the center where hundreds of families had been reunited with their heritage.
the community that had grown around the simple idea that everyone deserved to know where they came from. She lived purposefully ever after, Maya corrected gently, which is better than happy, because it lasts even when things get difficult. As they walked home together, to the house Maya had built on the edge of the cemetery, where she could always see the graves she'd sworn to protect, Emma skipped ahead while chattering about her plans to help return heritage to families around the world. Maya smiled, thinking about how the story would continue with the next generation. Emma would grow up knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged. But more importantly, she'd grow up understanding that belonging came with responsibility, to protect what mattered, to stand up for justice, and to choose purpose over comfort. The brass key still sat on Maya's desk in the center, now displayed alongside dozens of other keys that opened vaults and hearts and possibilities around the world. But it was no longer the key to Maya's future. That had been created by the choices she had made, the family she had built, and the work she had chosen to continue. Behind them, Willowbrook Cemetery settled into evening quiet, its ancient trees standing sentinel over the graves of people who'd lived and died and loved and lost. Their stories preserved not just in stone and earth, but in the living legacy of justice that grew stronger with each passing year. The last sound, as the family disappeared into their house, was Emma's voice, bright with possibility. "Tomorrow, Mama, can we find another family to help?" And Maya's answer, carried on the evening wind, "Tomorrow, sweetheart, we can change the world." What an incredible journey from orphan to guardian of justice. If this story inspired you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends who need to hear about Maya's courage, and subscribe for more amazing stories of people who chose purpose over profit. Your support helps me bring you these powerful tales every week.